Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kelly Meyerhofer. I'm a senior journalism major here at Marquette. This is my second year working with the OBrien, as an OBrien intern, this time with Liz Navratil of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, right over there, and last year with Raquel Rutledge of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Both experiences have helped me to gain confidence as a reporter and introduced me to journalists who have made it easier to begin navigating my way through this industry. While I worked for Raquel, I also interned more broadly for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. And I often worried that I didn't fit in there, that I was undeserving of my place there amongst these brilliant reporters whose work I'd grown up reading. Learning from Raquel as part of the OBrien Fellowship was never like that. I was working with a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, but the intimidation factor that I experienced in her newsroom completely disappeared. And that's what the OBrien Fellowship does for students. It carves a path for us to make meaningful connections with professional journalists. I remember one day, right around this time last year, I was in the Journal Sentinel's break room heating up my lunch, and a man came in to pick up a couple napkins. I recognized his face immediately as that of George Stanley, who since 1997 has led the Journal Sentinel newsroom without sacrificing quality journalism. He's overseen watchdog efforts that resulted in state and national reforms. He's the type of person you should really introduce yourself to, and I recognized that in the break room as my opportunity to do just that. But the intimidation that overwhelms me every single time I'm in that building on State Street took hold in that moment. So he took his napkins, and I stood there, starstruck, as my leftovers overcooked, if I remember correctly. So fast forward to present day, where I'm now introducing the man that I was too intimidated to even say hello to on my own. It took the OBrien Fellowship to change that, to allow me the privilege of introducing to you, and finally myself, George Stanley. It's nice to finally meet you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. Just your great experience with Raquel and in our newsroom. This is already a successful day for me, so thank you very much. I've been asked to talk today about the privilege of serving our communities with journalism that matters. And I'd like to frame this discussion around the OBrien Fellowship, because I think we have something very special and unique going on here at Marquette and in our city, and that maybe we can even think about ways to build upon that in the future. So the past decade has been really hard on us in the newspaper business. New technologies have brought new products, habits, and competition. And that, combined with the Great Recession, really gave us a stiff 1-2 punch to the face, businesses like ours. But those hard times force hard choices. But hard doesn't necessarily mean bad, because good things often rise from the challenges we face. And making difficult decisions helps us decide who we are and who we want to be. What do we stand for? What is the most important work that we do? How can we best serve our community? Because that is where we'll find our true value. So, as we asked ourselves about the most important services we could provide, we saw more clearly that there is a level of reporting that a big metro newsroom can do like no other in its region, that we at the Journal Sentinel can do like nobody else in Wisconsin. And that's the in-depth investigative and explanatory reporting that opens eyes and moves people to address problems. This is a journalism that a self-governing people need in order to adjust course, correct injustices, make improvements, and find common ground. You learn early in this line of work that the surest way to solve a problem in America is to bring it to the public's attention. People have to see what's broken, and then they have to care enough to fix it. Our nation's founders understood this. It's why they made a top priority of a free and independent press that would expose corruption, enlighten the public, and hold the powerful in check. For democracy to work, citizens need to know what their government is up to and what it should be up to. In the news business, our livelihood depends on the First Amendment, and I love the wisdom and faith that it embodies. Wisdom that public knowledge is the best defense against abuse of power, and faith that truth will overcome falsehood in time. So here's the challenge we face. This kind of reporting is the most important work we do, but it is also the most expensive work we do. As the economy hit bottom a few years back, our company started losing revenue faster than it could cut costs. Like other media companies, it acted quickly to survive. In one swift amputation, we lost a quarter of our staff and our budget. It was a desperate time. But necessity is the mother of invention. It's painful to make big changes, to reset priorities, to jettison the unessential. It's hard work to escape and to invent and to evolve. We tend not to volunteer to do these things and struggle this way when we don't have to. The question we kept asking ourselves was, how will we keep doing the work that matters when it's the most expensive work we do? So here was one idea, a new kind of fellowship program. The oldest and most famous fellowship program in journalism arose out of Milwaukee on the corner of 4th and State, on the floor I work on, in the corner room where we still hold our daily news meetings. That room was the office of Lucius Nieman, the editor who built the Milwaukee Journal into the city's most trusted source of news and information. Nieman eventually sold the Journal company to his business manager and his employees. And when he died, his widow took a portion of their gain from the sale to establish the Nieman Fellows at Harvard University in honor of her husband's legacy. There, distinguished journalists in mid-career, including many from our newsroom and a couple in this room, go on a learning sabbatical to Harvard for an academic year. Well, this might not be the best time for journalists to go on sabbatical. Their company could change ownership twice during the year that they were away. Pondering great thoughts, and as I often talked to with Raquel when she was at Harvard, sniffing flowers. But what if there were a new kind of fellowship program, one where a seasoned reporter could plumb a great story for 9 months alongside students and then bring that project home? The reporter would gain the time necessary to dig up to a big story's bones and lift them up into the light. The students could bring fresh digital skills to the project and learn what goes into a world-class report, something they might not otherwise get a chance to do until many years into a successful career. Could Marquette be our partner in this kind of a program? Yes, said Lori Bergen, then the dean of the Deidre College of Communication. But how can we make it happen? Enter at that moment Patricia and Peter Frechette, who are here with us today. Mrs. Frechette's mother, Alicia, graduated from Marquette with a degree in liberal arts, her father, Perry, with a degree in journalism. And after Marquette, Perry O'Brien worked as a reporter at the Gazette in Janesville, where the Frechettes grew up. The Frechettes told Marquette they were interested in honoring their loved ones by supporting education and democracy. And Lori Bergen asked me to make a video that she could show to the Frechettes that would describe the kind of reporting we would do with students through a public service fellowship program at Marquette. And this is the video we made. Hi, I'm George Stanley, Managing Editor of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and I'd like to thank you for considering giving your support to a new public service journalism fellowship program at Marquette. I'm standing right now in front of a building that exists because of the kind of reporting that we will do through this fellowship program. To be more accurate, it exists because of the public reaction to that journalism. Several years ago, Meg Kissinger reported about how people with severe mental illness in Milwaukee were living in squalid and terrible conditions. Most of these folks would have been in institutions in the past, but a federal court ruling that came out of a case in Milwaukee said that no matter how sick people were, no matter how poorly their minds worked, they couldn't be treated involuntarily unless it could be proven that they were in imminent danger to themselves or others. So the mental hospitals cleared out, and we started seeing thousands of homeless people. In Milwaukee, minimal effort was taken to help these people live on their own in the community. Some people who were so sick that they couldn't even go to the bathroom by themselves were living alone and sometimes dying alone in squalor. But we didn't just shine a spotlight on the problem. We went and looked for the place that was doing the best job at helping these people. It turned out to be Columbus, Ohio. In Columbus, they were actually spending fewer tax dollars on more effective programs to help people live in the community than Milwaukee was spending on its ineffective, inefficient, and incompetent programs. The reporting shocked the community into action. Republican County Executive Scott Walker came together with Democratic Mayor Tom Barrett to address the problem. A top-notch charity group in Chicago read the reports and expanded into Milwaukee to help. 5 apartment buildings were built or refurbished, providing safe, clean housing for more than 500 of our most vulnerable citizens. The apartments include live-in care workers who make sure that people are taking their medications properly. And if those medicines stop working or other problems arise, they help them get the help they need. This kind of journalism doesn't sell advertising, it doesn't boost TV ratings, it doesn't generate millions of hits on the internet. You're seeing a lot less of this than you're seeing of entertainment news, sports news, celebrity gossip. But this is the most important work we do. It builds our communities. It provides a self-governing people with the information they need to solve problems and move forward. And it fits in perfectly with Marquette's mission to use our knowledge, wisdom, and talents to serve others. Thanks again for considering this worthy effort. So then it was the Freshettes who took that seed of an idea and planted it and nurtured it so that it could bear fruit. Our first pilot project began with this simple but important question, which is how we like to begin all of our investigative projects, with simple, important questions. For decades, we'd reported scandal after scandal at the Milwaukee County Mental Health Complex. Each time, a director would be demoted, studies would be conducted, reports written, reforms promised. And then a year or two later, another scandal would erupt, often after someone died under atrocious conditions. The system, like its patients, never got better. Why not? After working for many years on mental health investigations, reporter Meg Kissinger had the knowledge to swim far below the surface of this problem. She needed the time to dive deep and get to the bottom of it once and for all, with the hope that citizens of our community would then see what was broken and care enough to fix it. With help from students at Marquette and colleagues in the newsroom, Meg was able to document with data that Milwaukee County operated the nation's worst mental health system. Patients here were largely unaided and untreated until they reached the depths of their illness, became dangerous, and police were called to drag them back into the emergency room, often in handcuffs and shackles. One woman was admitted for emergency mental health treatment 196 times in 6 years. 1 out of every 3 patients at the mental health emergency room was readmitted within 90 days. Meg also revealed that all past attempts at reform had failed because they had been blocked by county supervisors with zero expertise in mental health. And Meg and the students didn't stop. They searched for the places that were doing the best job of caring for people with serious illnesses that affect the way they think. She and her student partners found a far more caring and effective home service program in Giel, Belgium. They found a superior police training process in Houston, Texas, where the director for psychiatric emergencies had left his hometown of Milwaukee years earlier, disgusted at the way people were putting personal political agendas ahead of the patient's well-being. They found a vastly superior system of continual patient care just 75 miles away in Madison in Dane County. And miracles began to happen. Readers saw and they understood, and they cared enough to demand that it would be fixed. Our democracy still works. When enough people speak loudly and clearly, their elected representatives do listen. This is just a small sampling of dozens of actual headlines in the wake of chronic crisis. In a state where virtually nothing gets bipartisan support these days, the legislature passed bills with a total of 1 no vote in both houses that took away management of the county's mental health system from the dysfunctional county board and put it in the hands of health experts. Every Republican and Democrat in the state Senate voted for this reform legislation. They also passed other bills to improve mental health care across the state, and the governor signed them into law. This is what it looks like when well-informed citizens spring into action to improve lives. I'm going to read a letter that Meg received a little bit after the reforms went through. Dear Meg, I had to get in touch with you regarding my sister's recent visit at the Milwaukee County Mental Health Complex. She has been chronically mentally ill for decades now and has been to county more than 24 times on police holds, etc. On our last visit, I was met with a stern, "No, I'm not going there. They are awful," from my sister. But eventually she agreed. I was stunned, frankly. She stabilized after agreeing to take her meds. The staff was very responsive to her and our family visits. But what was most stunning was the aftercare. She has a group called Community Cares, a staff RN, and a social worker. They fixed her up in an assisted living situation, called us on nights and weekends during her initial stay at county, and have followed her several weeks now post-hospitalization. It's just incredible. My sister is responding to this treatment. Frankly, our family owes this to you and the Journal. Things seem to have genuinely changed. Remember, our daily reporting of multiple problems at the mental health complex had failed to solve these problems for decades. Even team investigations of serious scandals hadn't got the job done. We needed everything the OBrien Fellowship program provided, a safe place for a knowledgeable reporter to work for months without being gobbled up by breaking news demands, help from students and staff data miners, a travel budget to find and document best practices, a project focus to find the underlying systematic problems, and the public service mission to lay out a roadmap for possible solutions. That's the infrastructure of support the O'Brien Fellows are providing top journalists from 3 newsrooms every year now. After chronic crisis, our first full class of O'Brien Fellows arrived from the Seattle Times, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and the Journal Sentinel to produce 3 more outstanding special reports. Thanks to Dan Egan's A Watershed Moment, U.S. and Canadian authorities are finally being forced to pay attention to long-ignored threats to the Great Lakes by invasive species and rising phosphorus pollution from industrial farms. Hal Burton's Losing Ground series in the Seattle Times revealed how China is now the world's leading carbon burner and is increasing its carbon dioxide emissions faster than Western nations can cut them. Lillian Thomas's Poor Health series showed how hospital health systems that were founded as charities to serve the needy have been leaving the poorest and sickest areas of the United States to follow privately insured patients to the most wealthy and healthy suburbs. This past year's O'Brien Fellows, as we're seeing at this conference, are still bringing home chapters of their special reports. Raquel Rutledge on the continuing presence of chemicals known to destroy lungs in coffee roasting plants and e-cigarettes. Brandon Loomis on vanishing water supplies in the West and what can be done about it. Marjorie Valbrun on whether the welfare reforms of the 1990s actually accomplished their goals and what might be done to achieve those goals if they haven't. The impact of the O'Brien Fellows reporting is continual. Just last week, we saw 2 more important actions. a federal appeals court ruled that the EPA must act to defend the Great Lakes and all inland waters against future invasions from destructive species. And the Centers for Disease Control, as Raquel mentioned earlier, issued an alert to the coffee industry about the dangers of diacetyl and a related chemical to all those involved in grinding, roasting, and flavoring coffee. This is important work that is improving lives. The OBrien Fellowship program has proved to offer an exceptional platform for public service investigations and explanatory reports like these, where we can see a big problem from a distance because of years of reporting expertise on the subject, and where we can plan 9 months ahead. But since we started the program, it's become apparent that there's another kind of major public service reporting that also needs help and support. The kind of story we can't see coming, that we didn't have a clue was out there, that catches everyone by surprise, or that maybe even falls into our laps. When it comes to improving and saving lives, we've never done a more important investigation at the Journal Sentinel than deadly delays, which expose widespread sloppiness in newborn screening practices across the United States. The story fell into our hands the same day that a doctor at Children's Hospital saved the life of a baby who might be left permanently brain damaged. First, the doctor had to make the difficult ethical decision to even try to save the baby's life. The book said, don't even try, because the ammonia levels in his blood were so toxic that his brain might never recover, even if his heart kept pumping. But the doctor did save the baby's life. He had a rare but known and easily treated disorder that he and all newborns are supposed to be screened for with a routine heel prick blood test. He should have been diagnosed within a couple of days, given a special diet with sugar water, and left the hospital 1 day later than normal in perfect health. Instead, the hospital delayed sending in his newborn screening test, and the result did not come back until after his life-death struggle. The furious doctor contacted Mark Johnson, one of our science reporters, whose work he respected. He told Mark that hospitals all over the country were batching these blood samples, holding on to them until they could send a bunch to a state lab in a batch to save a few bucks in shipping costs, or because of ignorance, poor training, and sloppy procedures. Not one of our health and science writers had ever heard of batching or any problem like this. An internet search couldn't find any stories about it anywhere. But a search of state lab websites across the country found them with do not batch warnings aimed at hospital staff. Were babies suffering permanent brain damage and even dying because newborn screening tests weren't getting to labs within 3 days? And this was happening in an era when you can get shoes delivered to your home overnight for a small extra charge? As we learned over the next 6 months, this story could have come to any newsroom in America. Wisconsin's newborn screening performance was substandard, but about average. Many states were worse, but the doctor called us. We put 3 world-class reporters to work. Mark Johnson, a Pulitzer Prize-winning science reporter, John Faber, a Loeb Award-winning medical reporter, and Ellen Gabler, a Livingston Award-winning investigative reporter and an expert in gathering, mining, and interpreting data. A videographer joined the team, and then a news app developer who worked with Ellen to build an interactive map that showed the newborn screening performance of every hospital in every state that had accessible data. When we find a story like this, we go all in. If we decide to tell it, we're going to tell it the best we know how. How can you afford this in a time of declining resources? I'm asked this question all the time by other editors. It's a matter of choosing where to invest our limited resources. You take advantage of unique opportunities like the OBrien Fellowships every chance you get. And when you can't take advantage of an opportunity like that, you do your best to find other ways to get the job done. This work is why we're here. Ellen found that only 2 states were meeting newborn screening standards, tiny Delaware and spacious Iowa. If Iowa could do it perfectly, at a minimal cost, gladly borne by health insurance companies, then no hospital system, no state lab or regulatory agency could make excuses about it being too expensive or impossible to do. And they didn't even try, because there was no arguing with the data. Aurora, our state's largest healthcare system, took one look at the evidence and thanked us, saying nobody had showed them their poor newborn screening performance data before. They vowed to fix the problem that day, and they delivered on that promise. They discovered their bottlenecks in their procedures and addressed them immediately. The report led to huge improvements across the country. Arizona, the worst performing state in our original sample of 30, is now as good as Iowa at doing newborn screening. So is Wisconsin. A judge from one of the big journalism award contests came up to me later and said the investment you made in that story was huge for your newsroom, but minuscule for our society. When you think of what it did to save and improve lives, it's just an enormous return on the investment. But the babies who don't get sick and their parents will never know what you did. How do we tell that story? I don't know. And I honestly don't know how many newsrooms would have or could have done what we did with this story if a doctor had called them instead. My guess is you could count them on one hand. So here's the seed of another idea. Maybe we can find a way to build upon our special fellowship program to help other newsrooms do these sudden, surprising investigations, to provide the tools, knowledge, and infrastructure they need to get these jobs done. I just know we've got to find a way to keep doing them. Because this kind of public service investigative reporting actually saves lives. Had Juniper Horrocks been born 4 days earlier last fall, she would be dead. But Utah had just revamped its newborn screening program in response to deadly delays. The week of Juniper's birth, her hospital started using FedEx to ship newborn screening samples overnight instead of relying on regular mail. With a state lab that was closed on weekends and holidays, it was taking 5 days, a week, even 11 days before newborn screening samples were being tested. Little Juniper wouldn't have had a chance. We are so incredibly lucky, her mother said. A doctor wrote in response to this one, "Dear Ellen, for many years I was a practicing neonatologist and pediatrician in Milwaukee, and I realized the reluctance of hospitals to express transport the newborn blood test to Madison for evaluation. It seemed that no amount of suggestions or urging by the pediatric community made any impact. What the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel articles have accomplished is remarkable. It has taken on a national impact. Thank you and all the wonderful journalists who have taken part in this spectacular achievement." As we started seeing results and newborn screening processes improved across the country, I heard with new ears one of my favorite readings in church. For the first time, I understood that this entire chapter was a metaphor, starting from the sprout of Jesse, father of David, that the wolf and the lamb, the calf and the lion represented different kinds of people, and that even though this prophecy is 2,700 years old, it is still in the process of being fulfilled. Every time a polio vaccine or an antibiotic or a newborn screening test protects a child from what had been a grave and deadly danger. The baby shall play by the viper's den, and the child lay his hand on the adder's lair. They shall not harm or destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be covered with knowledge as water covers the sea. When we are at our best, this is what we do: spread knowledge of better ways that improve lives and lessen harm and destruction. It's a great mission, and it takes a big team of people to pull it off. With the OBrien Fellowships, that includes faculty members like Lori Bergen, John Pauley, Anna Garner. It includes university development directors like Jay Rabideau and program director Herb Lowe. It takes project editors like Marquette alum Greg Borowski, and all sorts of people behind the scenes: photographers, graphic artists, digital producers, copy editors, and designers. And of course, it takes the stars of our program, the now 11 fellows, and their student teams. And it takes generous people who use their resources and gifts to help others. Thank you again, Pat and Pete. And thank all of you for supporting this vital work. And I'd like to just have everyone give a hand to Pat and Pete Frechette for all they've done. So I'll be glad to answer any questions that anybody has. And if you're students, that's one thing I'll tell all our interns when they're brave enough to come talk to me. That you can't be shy. Even if you're naturally shy, which you're fine to be at home and stuff, as a reporter you can't be. You just have to go ask those questions because it's your job. So that should get somebody to ask a question.
Well, Kelly, that sounds like a dare for you.
She doesn't have one yet.
Can you tell a little bit more about, you said an idea for extending the OBrien Fellowship to cover
Yeah,
stories?
it's just an idea right now, but I'm wondering if there's a way where we could find a process where we could set up the kind of infrastructure we have to do these reports with data miner reporter experts. An expert who develops interactive apps so that you can take that data and so the public can see it and use it and learn from it. An expert project reporter, because a lot of papers don't have reporters with the experience and the ability to bring these things home, who might be able to partner up with a reporter at a smaller paper at another enterprise that doesn't have that kind of resource. So that if people knew that if a doctor called them with something like this and they did their homework a little bit and found out, we don't think anyone's ever done this story and it's a really big deal, they'd have a place to go where they could say, hey, could you guys help us with this? So that's kind of what I was thinking. There's some First Amendment centers out there that help people in a similar way with legal issues for open records and those types of things. But it's still just a little seed of an idea right now. Thank you. Somebody's got to have a question.
George, every organization tries to recruit and retain the best talent. And I'm wondering if having the kind of opportunities, the kind of commitment the Journal Sentinel has made to allowing reporters to work on these ambitious projects, do you feel like that strengthens your ability to be able to recruit and retain reporters?
No doubt about it. Every time we're out in national conferences, IRE, I'll be out at ASNE next week. We're basically besieged by people that want to work at the Journal Sentinel, which is a great thing to be. Unfortunately, we haven't had very many openings in recent years. But we have also, when we were first talking about this program, I always remember Pete turning to me and saying, "What's in this for you?" And I said, well, one thing, we know that there's going to be one great project a year that we don't have to worry about, that's never going to get cut, as long as we're working on this. And the other thing is we're going to find the best students at Marquette University. We're going to learn who they are through this program. And already, after the first set of 3 fellowships, we hired Erin Coy, who's our project designer. She designs all these special projects, like that beautiful Gasping for Air project that you saw online. And we also hired Michael Andre, who was a computer science major at Marquette, but he was drawn to journalism by this program and this type of reporting. So now we've got a computer scientist, and he's doing all sorts of things for us, including building a new story page that when you come online, and it'll work like that project page. So no matter what size your screen is, if it's a mobile phone or an iPad or a desktop, it'll look great in any form. And he's finishing out the last stages of that right now. So those are 2 great students in the last year that we hired because of this program. So it turned out it turned out better than I thought it would, to tell you the truth.
You've touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to know, how do you think this has changed the nature of the journalism that you practice at the Journal Sentinel now?
That's a great question. And things have happened that I would have never predicted or been able to predict. So When I first became managing editor in '97, our staff was not 3 times as big as it is now, but at least more than twice as big as it is now. And we were doing about 2 of these kinds of projects a year. Now, what do you think, Greg? 6, 8, sometimes more? He's overwhelmed. But what's happened? Yeah, Greg's too busy. He can't even count them anymore. But we're doing at least 3 times more of this kind of journalism that we were doing when we were much bigger, because we had to decide what our priorities were. And this is where we put our resources, and we get amazing feedback that this is what the public wants us to do. So our marketing department did a survey 2 years ago, and the number one thing that our women readers wanted us to do and thought was a reason for being was investigative journalism. And I think that this feeds into itself, especially when it has, when it benefits a community like this. It was also the number 3 pick for men readers, behind the Green Bay Packers and General Sports. So, I don't know what that says about the genders in our species, but you can reach your own conclusions.
Can you talk a little bit about why some of these stories are so tough in terms of the change in access to public records and how that has gotten more difficult? Maybe it might be a good thing to explain to people.
Yeah, fighting for public access to records is a never-ending battle. Many of you that live in Wisconsin saw what we went through this summer when on the 3rd of July, right on the eve of a holiday weekend, a very small group of leaders in the legislature tried to sneak in a budget bill that had nothing to do with policy, a complete rewrite of our state open records law that would have gutted the whole thing and made it impossible to get records. The state open records law. They put it in a budget bill. And they snuck it in on a holiday weekend on purpose because they didn't think anyone would be paying attention. And fortunately, we spotted it, and so did other newspapers in the state. And everyone went on their websites and said, please stop this from happening. Let your elected representatives know that we need open records. And we need them for that great quote from James Madison: if the public doesn't know what their elected representatives are up to, their elected representatives will, I guarantee you, be up to no good. It's guaranteed. And the only reason for them to want to hide the records is because they want to be up to no good. Otherwise, what are they afraid of? So the public responded, Republicans and Democrats. People from all over Wisconsin. They were copying me on their emails they were sending the legislatures, and there were hundreds of them. And they were coming from Ladysmith and Minocqua and Elm Grove and Mequon and Madison and all over the state of Wisconsin. And everyone was mad. And they said, those are our records, they're not yours. Keep your hands off. On the 4th of July, they backed off and said, we're not going to change the open records law. It was right over the holiday. But that's how hard it is you got to keep fighting, because people want to do things in secret. They want to cut secret deals, and they want to protect themselves from embarrassment. They want to even protect themselves from embarrassment that might not even be there, but they're just worried. So Ellen Gabler is a reporter that was a key person on deadly delays that just asked that question. She fought for 5.5 months to get newborn screening data, which is obviously a public record, from our own state lab here in Wisconsin. So of the first 27 states that we got records for, Wisconsin was the last one to give us the data. And it's part of the state lab, and we didn't want any personal identification data. There's no babies identified, there's no ways to identify the baby, so there's no reason to withhold this. All we wanted was the hospital's performance and how quickly they were getting them to the state lab. Bare bones stuff. Ellen pulled every lever with every state she could possibly think of, and basically kept going over people's heads when she finally couldn't get any further with them, and got the state lab director's boss to release the records how many days before we published? This is the week we published, right? Yeah. So the week we published, they finally released the records because she said, we're coming out with this and we're gonna describe you guys as roadblocks that wouldn't release the data. Once we had the data, we could put it in the database and show exactly how every hospital in Wisconsin did. Ellen went to Aurora before we published and showed them the data because they weren't performing well at all. And the guy who was in charge of that program said, oh my God, we've never seen this. The state labs never even showed it to us. This is a problem. We've got to fix it, and we're going to fix it today. And they found out, if I remember right, that they were making all the hospitals send their labs to West Dallas Memorial, and then the courier was leaving from there, creating a huge bottleneck that took days to actually get them to Madison. It was very easy for them to fix. They just had the courier go to each hospital every day. Boom. And you saw that little baby, on life support that died just because that test didn't get in on time, or it almost died. This is how there's another. The story continues because John Dawson, a retired Foley and Lardner lawyer, teaches at the law school right next door, and every year he asked me to come in and talk to his media law class, and it was either this spring or last spring. I was telling this exact story about open records and how it's a continual fight, and there was an older guy in the class. He was much older than all the other students. And he kept nodding his head like this as I was telling the story. And then when it came time to the questions like this, he raised his hand. And he was the guy that Ellen talked to at Aurora, and now he's in law school. And he stood up and he said, that's exactly what happened. And he was so proud because he said, and now we're 100% in 24 hours. And it was fantastic. And then a young law student came up to me after the class, and he said, didn't that come out like 2 falls ago? And I said, yeah. And he said, I thought so. He goes, we were expecting our first baby then, and we were going to these prenatal classes, and we went to 4 classes, and at every single class, after the nurse explained what was going to happen and what we were going to go through, the first question anyone asked was, how fast do you get your newborn screening samples in? So it just shows you that the public can change everything if they know what's going on.
I just wanted to take a minute, as I'm not a journalist, but I read the news, and I wanted to say that the foundation, the journal, reporters in general, caring about social justice and bringing a voice to people who often don't have that voice or that means. And oftentimes the so-called experts will talk a lot about us, but very few people talk to us. And so I love what the fellowship is doing and what you're promoting. And I also wanted to make the point that at the same time we're having a loss in journalism, especially written, and we've also seen a definite rise in the idea of journalism being some neutrality, where you get somebody to talk about why slavery was bad and then somebody to talk about why slavery was good and call that journalism, as opposed to actually digging for the facts. And I loved in the examples that you gave that you talked about actually giving people the facts, because I think so many times in modern journalism we're given 2 sides without anybody ever having the guts to say, but this is the reality. And so I just wanted to take a moment and thank you for that, and see if there was anything you wanted to expand on as far as the whole using facts as opposed to just let's get a couple opinions.
Yeah. Thank you for that very much. That's an excellent, those are excellent points, and I think Marjorie was talking about that earlier, how complicated things are and how simple people try to make them in political debates. and they're not simple. So let's find out what's really going on there before we screw things up even worse or come up with a program that doesn't work. The great thing about the changes have hurt us as far as competition and revenue and things like that. But they've also, new technology has helped us too, because we can do data reporting like we've never done before. And we have evidence. When I was a young reporter, if we would have found out about newborn screening, the best we could have done was he said, she said, and have two people arguing. And what that would have led to, it might have led to some reforms over time, but it mostly would have led to arguing and saying, oh, we can't fix that. They're demanding too much. We wouldn't have an interactive database where you could go to the hospital where you're planning to have your baby and find out if they're getting their newborn screening tests in time, like Ellen and Alan Vestal built. And that changes everything, because now there's no arguing anymore. I also will promise you that the Journal Sentinel will never print an opinion that says slavery is good. But that brought up a really good story. I was a judge in a contest last year. It's a guy named John Sutter from CNN, and he works with Myra Lowe at CNN, and he did this fantastic story about a country that still has slavery. It's Mauritania in Africa, and oh my God, if you want to read what slavery was really like, read that story. You can Google it, and because when people have that kind of power over other people, the depravity that they will go to if they have that kind of power is extraordinary, and you know that that's what happened in the American South. It had to, because they had the same kind of power there. So if you want to see what slavery was really like, go read John Sutter's story. It's an amazing piece of journalism, and I'd recommend it for every student in the room too. And I think the students, that would be a great thing for all of them to keep in mind, that a lot of times you're going to hear theories, you're going to hear ideas, you're going to hear people spouting off political arguments. Take everything you hear with a grain of salt and then go get on the street and talk to real people and find out what's really going on out there. That's the best thing you can do. Thank you.